Welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I've been sitting on this for a while, turning it over in my head like a smooth, dark stone, feeling its weight and its sharp edges. Some stories you tell to get them out, to exercise them. This one? This one I'm telling because I need to know if I was living in a different reality from everyone else. It starts, as many of these stories do, with a love I thought was the kind they write about. Her name was Clara, and she was, for the longest time, the sun in my solar system. Everything orbited her, my plans, my hopes, my daily routines. We met in a small, independent cinema during a festival for obscure European films. I was there for a brooding Swedish drama. She was there for a whimsical French romance. We ended up arguing good-naturedly about cinematic philosophy over coffee afterwards, and that was it. I was hooked. She had this laugh that could cut through the thickest silence, a way of tilting her head when she was genuinely listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. We were inseparable. We built a life in a small, sunlit apartment filled with secondhand books and mismatched mugs, a testament to our combined histories. Our world wasn't just us, though. It was a constellation of five. There was Marco, my best friend since we were kids, who built things with his hands and had a heart as solid as the oak he worked with. There was Sophia, his long-term girlfriend, sharp-witted and fiercely loyal, or so I thought. And there was Daniel, the quiet observer of the group, the one who always had a profound piece of advice when you least expected it. We were a unit. Friday nights were for board games and cheap wine at our place. Sundays were for lazy brunches at the corner cafe. We navigated job losses, family dramas, and petty squabbles together. I thought our foundation was unshakable. With Clara, I felt seen. I'm a graphic designer. I live in a world of shades and concepts, of quiet introspection. I'm not the guy who's going to get into a bar fight or bench press a car. My strengths, I believed, were in my patience, my ability to listen, my emotional availability. Clara always said she loved that about me. She'd call me her anchor in the storm of her own more chaotic, vibrant energy. She was the life of the party, and I was her quiet corner to come home to. It worked, or at least for 3 years I was convinced it worked. The first cracks were so small I barely registered them. It started with her phone. It was suddenly always angled away from me. A new password she claimed was for work security. Then came the new gym obsession. She'd always been active, but this was different. It was frenetic. She'd come home late, buzzing with an energy that felt foreign, smelling of a different gym's antiseptic cleaner and a cologne that wasn't mine. She started talking about a guy there, Victor. He was a personal trainer, a beast, she'd laugh. He was helping her with her form. I'm not a jealous person by nature. I trusted her. So when I'd ask about her evening and she'd give vague, clipped answers, I told myself I was being insecure. When she started criticizing little things about me, the way I dressed, the music I listened to, my choice to read a book instead of watching a reality show with her, I told myself that all couples go through phases. I tried harder. I suggested date nights at new restaurants she'd mentioned. I bought her flowers for no reason. I made a point of asking more about her day, about this new gym life. Each attempt felt like throwing a pebble into a well and hearing no splash. She was receding from me, and the space she left behind was filling with a cold dread. She started using a new vocabulary, peppered with phrases I assumed she was picking up from Victor. Things were alpha or beta. She'd make jokes about my beta energy when I'd opt to talk through a disagreement instead of raising my voice. The jokes had a sting to them, a barb I couldn't quite pull out. Our friends noticed the shift too, but they read it differently. Marco would clap me on the shoulder and say, "Clara's really getting into her fitness, eh? Maybe you should join her, bulk up a bit." Sophia would comment on how fiery and passionate Clara seemed lately, as if it were a positive development, a blossoming. They saw her pulling away from me as her growing into a new, more exciting version of herself, and the unspoken implication was that I was being left behind, a relic of a quieter past. I was the comfortable sweater she was now trading for a leather jacket. The quiet moments we used to share, reading side by side on the couch, our feet tangled together, disappeared. They were replaced by a tense silence, her thumbs flying across her phone screen, a small, secretive smile on her face. The apartment, our sanctuary, started to feel like a waiting room. I was waiting for a verdict, a diagnosis for an illness I couldn't name. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, not just from her, but within my own skin. I started to question the very things she once loved about me. Was my kindness actually weakness? Was my thoughtfulness a sign of indecisiveness? Her new perspective was a distorting mirror, and I was starting to see a warped reflection of myself I didn't recognize and certainly didn't like. The dread became a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach that tightened every time I heard her keys in the door. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. I just kept putting it off, clinging to the hope that I was wrong, that this was all in my head, a product of my own anxiety. I was watering a dead plant, hoping for a miracle. The final week before it all shattered was the worst. She was a ghost in our home, physically present but emotionally a million miles away. The shared jokes, the casual touches, the easy intimacy, it was all gone, replaced by a polite, formal distance you'd expect from strangers sharing a lift. I would lie awake at night next to her and feel an unbridgeable chasm between us. I could hear her breathing, feel the warmth from her body, but she was entirely gone. I was mourning a relationship with a person who was still sleeping beside me. I tried one last time to bridge the gap. I cooked her favorite meal, pasta carbonara, the one I'd made on our third date that had, in her words, sealed the deal. I lit candles, put on the soft jazz playlist she used to love. I wanted to remind us of the us we had been. She walked in, looked at the table, and gave a tired sigh. "Leo, I'm exhausted. I was just going to have a protein shake." She didn't even register the effort. She ate a few bites in silence, scrolling through her phone, before announcing she was going to have an early night. She didn't look at me once. That was the moment I knew. The hope I'd been clinging to finally withered and died. The silence she left in her wake wasn't peaceful. It was loud, echoing with everything that was unsaid, with the ghost of the love that used to fill this space. I sat there in the flickering candlelight, staring at the cooling pasta, and I understood. I wasn't just losing her, I had already lost her. I was just the last one to be informed. The air in our apartment grew thick with unspoken words, a palpable tension that made my own home feel like hostile territory. I felt like an archaeologist dusting off the bones of a dead civilization, trying to piece together what had gone so wrong from the fragments left behind. Every object held a memory that now felt tainted. The framed photo on the mantelpiece from our trip to Lisbon, us smiling, her head on my shoulder, felt like a cruel mockery. The coffee mug she bought me that said "World's Best Boyfriend" felt sarcastic. I was living in a museum of a failed relationship, and I was the sole, miserable curator. I decided I couldn't live in the waiting room any longer. I needed to know, even if the truth was the thing that would finally break me. The illusion of happiness was more painful than a clean break would be. I needed to open the door and face whatever was on the other side. So I waited for her to come home the next evening, the cold knot in my stomach now a solid block of ice. I rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, but when I heard her keys, my mind went blank. All I had was the raw, terrifying feeling of impending loss. She walked in, dropped her gym bag with a thud, and for a moment it was just another Tuesday. But she saw the look on my face, the way I was standing there in the middle of the living room, and her own expression hardened, a mask of weary defensiveness sliding into place. The battle was about to begin, and I already felt like I had lost. The air was still and heavy, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on, their familiar patterns suddenly feeling alien. The whole world outside was moving on, oblivious to the fact that mine was about to be torn apart. When Clara walked in, she didn't immediately notice my posture of silent dread. She was humming, a tune I didn't recognize, as she rummaged through her gym bag. "Forgot my shaker bottle at Victor's," she muttered, more to herself than to me. The name hung in the air between us, a toxic particle. That was it. That was the thread I had to pull. "Clara," I said, my voice sounding strained,
unfamiliar to my own ears. "We need to talk." She finally looked up, her eyes flicking over me with a sort of impatient appraisal. The defensive mask was firmly in place. "Leo, I've had a long day. Can this wait?" "No," I said, a rare note of finality in my voice. "It can't." I walked over to the sofa and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. She remained standing, arms crossed, a posture of defiance. It felt less like a conversation between partners and more like an interrogation. I took a deep breath, the rehearsed words coming back to me in a jumbled mess. "Something's been wrong for months," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "You're distant. You're somewhere else. I feel like I don't know you anymore. I need to know what's going on. I need to know about Victor." She finally looked up, her eyes flicking over me with a sort of impatient appraisal. The defensive mask was firmly in place. "Leo, I've had a long day. Can this wait?" "No," I said, a rare note of finality in my voice. "It can't." I walked over to the sofa and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. She remained standing, arms crossed, a posture of defiance. It felt less like a conversation between partners and more like an interrogation. I took a deep breath, the rehearsed words coming back to me in a jumbled mess. "Something's been wrong for months," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "You're distant. You're somewhere else. I feel like I don't know you anymore. I need to know what's going on. I need to know about Victor."
I braced myself for a variety of responses: denial, tears, anger, and accusation that I was being paranoid. I was not prepared for what I got. She didn't flinch. She just stared at me for a long moment, a slow, almost pitying expression dawning on her face. Then she let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of profound annoyance, as if my question was a tiresome inconvenience. "Fine," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "You want to know? I slept with him. A few times, actually." The words didn't even register at first. They were just sounds. My brain tried to assemble them into a coherent thought, but it couldn't. It was like trying to read a sentence in a language I didn't understand. I just stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say she was joking, that she was just trying to shock me. But her face remained a cold, hard mask. The silence stretched, and in that silence, the world tilted on its axis. The floor felt like it was falling away from me. I could hear a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "Why?" The word came out as a whisper, a pathetic little croak. I was begging for a reason, for something that would make sense of the senseless, something to staunch the bleeding. I needed a reason that I could dissect and analyze, a logic to the chaos. What she gave me instead was a character assassination. She finally sat down, not opposite me, but on the arm of the chair, looking down at me. And then the smirk appeared. It was small, just a little twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it was the cruelest thing I had ever seen. It was a smirk of victory, of condescension. It was the smirk of someone who had already checked out of the conversation, out of the relationship, out of my life, and was now just observing the wreckage from a safe distance. "I needed a real man, Leo," she said, her voice laced with that same dismissive pity. The smirk widened slightly. I needed more." Each word was a physical blow. A real man. The phrase echoed in the ringing silence of my mind. What did that even mean? She saw the confusion and pain on my face, and it seemed to spur her on. She stood up and began to pace, not with nervous energy, but with the confidence of a lecturer laying out a thesis. "Look at you," she said, gesturing at me, at our apartment, at our life. "Everything is so soft. We talk about our feelings, we analyze everything. You write me poetry, for God's sake. You'd rather spend a Saturday afternoon in a museum than at a rugby match. You never get jealous. You never fight for me." She was listing my personality traits, the very things she once claimed to love, as if they were indictments, as if they were fundamental flaws in my character. "Victor isn't like that," she continued, her eyes alight with a strange, fervent passion. "He's decisive, he's primal,
He pushes me physically and mentally. When he wants something, he takes it. He's got this raw, masculine energy. Being with him, it makes me feel alive. It makes me feel like a woman. I felt my entire sense of self begin to crumble. For 3 years, I had believed that being a real man meant being kind, supportive, emotionally intelligent, and loyal.
I had built my identity around those principles, and now the woman I loved was telling me that those qualities were not only undesirable, but were in fact the very reason she had sought comfort and passion in the arms of another man. She was holding up a mirror to me and telling me that the person I saw was a failure, a pale imitation of what a man should be. My kindness was weakness, my sensitivity was a burden, my love was not enough because the person delivering it was not enough. I couldn't speak, my throat was tight, my lungs felt like they had been squeezed empty. I just sat there, absorbing the blows. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of steely justification. She was not sorry. There was not a shred of remorse in her eyes. In her mind, this was my fault. Her betrayal was a logical consequence of my inadequacy. "I'm sorry it hurts you, Leo," she said, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "But I can't apologize for needing what I need. I've been feeling this way for a long time. I was suffocating here." Suffocating. In the home we had built, filled with laughter and love and shared dreams. Suffocating with the man who had held her when she cried, celebrated her triumphs, and loved every part of her he was allowed to see. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I finally found my voice. "So you didn't think to talk to me?" I asked, the words raw. "You didn't think to tell me you were unhappy? We could have worked on it. We could have tried." She laughed, a short, bitter, humorless sound. "Tried what? For you to suddenly change your entire personality? To become someone you're not? That's not fair to either of us. This is who you are, Leo, and it's just not what I want anymore." She walked over to the bedroom and came back out with a pre-packed overnight bag. It was a detail that twisted the knife further. This wasn't a spontaneous confession. This was a planned demolition. She had been ready for this, waiting for the right moment to push the detonator. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She looked at me one last time, my broken form on the sofa, and her expression was not one of sadness or regret. It was one of relief. She was a prisoner making a jailbreak. "The friends, Marco and Sophia and Daniel, they know," she said casually as a parting shot. "We've all been talking about it for weeks. They understand." And with that, she opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind her. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life breaking in two. I sat there in the ruins for how long I don't know. The candles I had lit for our romantic dinner had burned down to puddles of wax. The room was cold. The phrase, "I needed a real man," played on a loop in my head, a demonic mantra. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the utter contempt with which it was delivered. It was the calculated cruelty of the smirk. It was the complete annihilation of my self-worth. And as I sat there, shattered, another, more sinister thought began to creep in. They understand. She had just told me that my friends, my bedrock, my tribe had known, and they had said nothing. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was a conspiracy, and I was the last to know. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. The initial shock was a physical thing, a heavy blanket of static that muffled the world and slowed my thoughts to a crawl. I sat on that sofa as the city outside darkened completely, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the living room floor, making monsters out of familiar objects. The apartment, once a vibrant vessel of our shared life, now felt like a tomb. Every object was an artifact of a life that was no longer mine. The air itself felt thin, difficult to breathe. My first instinct, a primal urge for connection, was to reach for my phone. I needed my friends. I needed Marco.
He was my brother in all but blood. We'd known each other since we were 5 years old, building forts and scraping our knees on the same patches of pavement. He was the one I called when my father passed away, the one who sat with me in silence for hours because he knew words were useless. He would understand. He would be furious on my behalf. He would help me make sense of this nightmare. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I found his name in my contacts and pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times.
Each ring was an eternity, stretching my frayed nerves tighter. Finally, he picked up. "Leo? What's up, mate? It's late." His voice was normal, casual, too normal. "She told me," I choked out, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "Clara, she told me everything. She's been cheating on me with that guy, Victor." I waited for the explosion. I waited for "that bitch," or "I'm coming over right now," or "what do you need?" 100 different variations of the righteous, supportive anger I was so desperate to hear. Instead, there was a pause. A long, drawn-out silence that was more damning than any words could have been. "Oh," Marco finally said. His voice was flat, cautious. "Right. She said she was going to talk to you tonight." My blood ran cold. She said? You knew? Marco, you knew about this?" Again, that hesitant pause. "Look, mate, it's complicated," he started, and the weariness in his tone was like a punch to the gut. This wasn't news to him. This was old, settled information. Clara's been unhappy for a while. We've all seen it. "Seen it?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You saw it and you didn't think to say anything to me? Your best friend?" "What was I supposed to say, Leo?" he shot back, a defensive edge to his voice now. "Get in the middle of your relationship? It wasn't my place. Besides, to be honest, we kinda get where she's coming from." I felt like I'd been submerged in ice water. "You what? You get where she's coming from? She cheated on me, Marco. She destroyed me, and she did it with a smirk on her face, telling me I wasn't a real man." "Okay, maybe she could have handled it better," he conceded, a meaningless platitude. "But you can't deny that you two were on different paths. She's got all this energy. She wants to go out, to be active. And well, you're you. You like your quiet nights in." She felt held back. He was paraphrasing her. He was using her arguments. The conversation Clara and I had just had, the one that had ripped my world apart, was one my best friend had already had with her. They had workshopped her justifications. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "She cheats and it's my fault because I like reading books?" "Don't be dramatic," he sighed, the sound of a man who was tired of this conversation before it had even properly begun. "It's not about books. It's about a fundamental difference in, I don't know, intensity. She needs someone who can match her, someone who challenges her." The unspoken words hung between us. "Someone who isn't you." I couldn't breathe. "I have to go," I mumbled, and hung up before he could say anything else. I threw the phone onto the sofa as if it were on fire. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost surreal. This wasn't just Marco being a bad friend. This was a complete realignment of my reality. He hadn't just failed to support me, he had actively taken her side. He had listened to her side of the story and had validated it. He agreed with her. He believed I was not man enough for her. The next day was a blur of hollow-eyed misery. I called in sick to work citing a stomach bug. The real sickness was in my soul. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. "Hey, Marco told me you and Clara talked. I know this is hard, but it's probably for the best. We should all meet up and talk this through. The 5 of us. Let's clear the air. Our usual cafe at 4? The 5 of us. The casual way she wrote it, as if our sacred number hadn't been violated, as if one of us hadn't been amputated from the group.
A small, insane part of me felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Marco had misspoken. Maybe seeing them in person, letting them see the devastation, would change things. Maybe they just needed to understand the depth of the cruelty. So I went. I showered, put on clean clothes, and walked to the cafe like a man walking to his own execution. They were already there, sitting at our usual corner table. Marco, Sophia, and Daniel. But they weren't alone. Clara was with them. They were sitting there, laughing about something, nursing coffees like it was any other Sunday brunch. The sight of them all together, so comfortable, so normal, while my world was in ashes, was nauseating. When they saw me, the laughter died. Clara's face settled into that same look of pity. Marco looked uncomfortable. Sophia gave me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel, true to form, just stared at his coffee cup. I sat down, and the silence was suffocating. Sophia, ever the mediator, spoke first. "Leo, we're so sorry you're hurting," she began, her tone gentle but patronizing. "But we need you to try and see this from a broader perspective. Relationships end. People grow apart." "This wasn't growing apart," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was starting to burn through the shock. "This was a betrayal. By her," I looked at Clara, "and by all of you." Clara sighed dramatically. "Leo, don't make this a public scene." "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice low. "I'm trying to understand how the three people I trusted most in the world could know this was happening and not only say nothing, but actively agree with it." It was Sophia who answered, her words precise and devastating. "We love you, Leo, you know that. But we love Clara too, and we saw her unhappiness. You're a wonderful person, but you're gentle. You're steady. Clara needs fire."
She needs passion. She tried to find it with you, but it wasn't there. You can't blame a person for wanting to feel alive. She was saying the exact same things Clara had said, the same things Marco had said. It was like they were all reading from the same script, a script that had been written and rehearsed without me. A script in which I was cast as the boring, inadequate beta male who couldn't satisfy his woman, who ultimately deserved to be cheated on. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes full of a kind of sad resignation. "It's just different energies, man," he mumbled, a pathetic echo of the other sentiments. His betrayal was quieter, a betrayal of inaction and silent agreement, but it cut just as deep. I looked from face to face. My best friend, his girlfriend who was like a sister to me, my quiet confidant. They were all looking at me with a mixture of pity and impatience, as if I were a child having a tantrum who just couldn't grasp a simple adult concept. They weren't my friends anymore. They were her jury, and they had already reached a unanimous verdict. In that moment, sitting in that cafe, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 happy memories, I saw the truth with blinding, painful clarity. Their friendship, their loyalty, it was all conditional. It was based on a version of me that fit neatly into their group dynamic. The moment a more charismatic, more alpha narrative came along, presented by a tearful, unhappy Clara, they had switched their allegiance without a second thought. My pain was an inconvenience to them. My side of the story was irrelevant because it disrupted the new, more exciting narrative they had all agreed upon. They weren't just justifying her actions, they were participating in my humiliation. They had chosen her. They had chosen the story where I was the problem. The story where cheating was an understandable, almost noble, act of self-actualization. And I was left on the outside, looking in at the smirking, happy circle I no longer belonged to. I stood up from the table. No one tried to stop me. "I think I've heard enough," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The rage had burned out, leaving behind a cold, empty calm. I understand everything perfectly now. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the bell on the door chiming my exit. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see.
4 people, already resuming their conversation, my empty chair a momentary, insignificant void in their perfect, self-justified world. The double betrayal was complete. It wasn't just my heart that was broken, it was my entire belief system in loyalty, friendship, and love.
I was truly, and for the first time in my life, completely on my own. The walk home from the cafe was a disorienting journey through a city I no longer recognized. The familiar streets, the buildings, the faces of strangers, they all seemed part of a world to which I no longer had a membership card. The calm I'd felt upon leaving the cafe was a fragile shell, and with every step it began to crack, revealing the raw, howling grief beneath. I wasn't just grieving Clara, I was grieving Marco, Sophia, and Daniel. I was grieving the 5 of us, the easy laughter, the shared history, the comfortable certainty that I had a tribe. I had lost my partner and my support system in a single, devastating blow. It was a unique, dismembering kind of pain. The first few weeks were a desolate wasteland of survival. I moved through my days on autopilot. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, force myself to shower, go to work, stare at a screen, come home, stare at the walls. The apartment was a minefield of memories. Her scent lingered on a throw pillow. A single earring of hers lay glinting under the radiator. A half-finished book she was reading was still on the nightstand, its bookmark a silent testament to an interrupted life. I packed it all away. I gathered every photograph, every gift, every stupid little memento and put them in a box. I sealed it with tape as if I could contain the memories, as if I could quarantine the past. But the emptiness was just as loud as the memories had been. The silence in the apartment was a physical presence. I'd find myself listening for the sound of her keys, the tune she would hum, the sound of the shower running. The absence of these small, mundane sounds was a constant, screaming reminder of what I had lost. Sleep was a mercy that rarely came. When it did, it was filled with nightmares. I'd dream of the cafe, of their pitying faces, of Clara's smirk. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat. The words, "I needed a real man," echoing in the dark. It was a psychological torture loop. Her words and their friends' validation of them had burrowed deep into my psyche. I started to believe them. I would look at myself in the mirror and see only my flaws. I was too soft. I was too sensitive. I was too quiet. I was boring. I dissected every interaction, every memory of our relationship, searching for the evidence of my failure. The time I'd cried during a sad movie, the time I'd chosen a quiet night in over a loud party, the time I tried to talk through an argument instead of shouting. All these moments, which I had once seen as signs of a healthy, emotionally mature relationship, were now reframed as evidence of my inadequacy. They had successfully gaslit me into believing I was the architect of my own heartbreak. The digital world was another layer of hell. I knew I should block them all, but it was like probing a sore tooth. The pain was a confirmation that the wound was still real. One evening, in a moment of self-destructive weakness, I looked, and there it was. A photo on Sophia's Instagram feed. All of them. Marco, Sophia, Daniel, Clara, and him, Victor. They were all at a pub, squeezed into a booth, raising their glasses to the camera. Victor had his arm wrapped tightly around Clara's shoulder, a possessive, triumphant grin on his face. Clara was leaning into him, looking happier and more radiant than I had seen her in years. And my friends, my former friends, were beaming. They were all smiling, part of this new, upgraded social unit. They hadn't just replaced me in Clara's life, they had replaced me in their own. I was a footnote, an inconvenient chapter they had torn out of the book to make the story flow better. That picture was the final, brutal confirmation. It shattered the last, lingering shred of hope that maybe this was a misunderstanding, that maybe they would come to their senses and realize their mistake. They weren't missing me. They were thriving without me. Their world had not only continued on, it had improved. Seeing that photo was both the worst and the best thing that could have happened. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that seared through the numbness.
But it was also a catalyst. It was the rock bottom I needed to hit. As I stared at their smiling faces, something inside me shifted. A tiny, cold flicker of anger began to burn. Not the wild, grieving rage of before, but a different kind of anger. A quiet, focused, clarifying anger. Who were they to define me? Who were they to decide what a real man was? Their definition was a caricature, a shallow, insecure stereotype. A real man, in their view, was someone who performed dominance, who equated emotional suppression with strength, who saw relationships as a power struggle. Victor, with his possessive arm and triumphant grin, was their ideal. And I looked at that picture, at that man, and I realized with a certainty that cut through all the pain and confusion that I never, ever wanted to be him. I didn't want a love that was based on possession. I didn't want friendships that were conditional on me fitting into a predefined mold of masculinity. Their world was small, and it was cheap. My flaws, the things they had used as weapons against me, were my strengths. My sensitivity was empathy. My thoughtfulness was intellect. My desire to communicate was a sign of emotional courage, not weakness. It was the courage to be vulnerable, a courage that none of them, with their posturing and their easy judgments, actually possessed. That night, I blocked them all. Clara, Marco, Sophia, Daniel, Clara.
I severed the digital ties, one by one. Each click was a small act of reclamation. I was taking back control of my space, my peace, my narrative. The next morning, I woke up and, for the first time in weeks, the dread was not the first thing I felt. There was a sliver of something else. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was a quiet sense of resolve. The rebuilding was a slow, arduous process. It wasn't a Hollywood montage of me instantly getting fit and successful. It was small, painful, deliberate steps. I started by rearranging the entire apartment. I moved the sofa, bought a new rug, changed the pictures on the walls. I needed to erase the geography of my old life. I started cooking for myself again, not elaborate meals, but simple, nourishing food. The act of creating something, of caring for myself, was grounding. I threw myself into my work with a new focus. I poured all the pain, the anger, the confusion into my designs. My work became sharper, more evocative. I was channeling the chaos into creation. I started walking. Long, aimless walks through the city with music in my headphones. It was a way to be alone without feeling lonely, to be a part of the world without having to interact with it. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted from when my world had become so tightly focused on that group of 5. It was tentative at first, but their uncomplicated warmth was a balm. They listened to my story not with pity or judgment, but with simple, honest outrage on my behalf. They reminded me that genuine friendship existed, that loyalty wasn't a myth. I started to redefine what strength meant to me. Strength wasn't about not feeling pain. It was about feeling it fully, letting it break you, and then, patiently, piece by piece, putting yourself back together. Strength was admitting I needed help and starting therapy. Strength was learning to sit with the silence in my apartment and not be terrified of it. Strength was looking in the mirror and starting to recognize the person staring back, not as the inadequate man Clara and my friends had painted, but as a survivor. I was building a new foundation, one forged in betrayal and fire, but it was my own. It was solid. The scars were there, deep and permanent, but they were a part of me now, a map of where I had been. They were a reminder of the price of blind trust, but also a testament to my own resilience. I was learning to be my own anchor, and I was discovering, slowly but surely, that I was more than enough. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you what moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.